right then, good evening, good evening, good evening. It is evening where I am from. 11 times 609. Good evening to you. All right, today we're going to be doing the Mars in the Fifth House video. Hello, Manifestaholic. Today we're going to be doing the Mars in the Fifth House video. So let us begin. Hi. Actually, oh no, Saturday I can't. I was gonna say that I'm gonna do it live, but actually I remembered that I have a wedding on Saturday. But thank you guys so much for joining me. All right, let's begin. All right, Mars in the fifth house. So, one of the most obvious significations of Mars in the fifth is battle as a form of play. Here, all of Mars's crude, aggressive, destructive significations take on a fun-loving bent. Instead of random acts of violence, it is a love of sports. Instead of a potty mouth and crude speech or general foul language that is meant to be hurtful and cutting, the language turns comedic, ironic, or even sarcastic. The antagonism of Mars becomes playful and entertaining. In the fifth house, the attacks of Mars do not cause tears of sorrow, but indeed tears of laughter, joy, and excitements. The fights of Mars are a game. This individual would love martial arts, swimming, playing soccer, playing video games and board games, making fun of other people because they understand how to convert competition, animosity, enmity, hostility, tension, and even vengeance into something fun and light and enjoyable, with none of the inherent nastiness of Mars's general significations. So, that out of the way, let us now contemplate how the fifth house relates to true knowledge and understanding. You gain knowledge passively in the second house. You analyze it objectively with logic in the third house. You have contemplated it subjectively in the fourth house, and now you have arrived at a light bulb moment in the fifth house. The fifth house is the house of your own ideas and opinions and insights and theories that you have come up on your own after much experimentation. Mars, as the supreme planet of analysis and critical thinking, sitting in the fifth house, would have these qualities amplified. Whereas the third is analysis and the fourth is contemplation, the fifth is experimentation, because play is also experimentation. In the fifth house, we play with ideas, we play with the knowledge we have been given. Consider how small children, through playing mommy and daddy, arrive at their own understanding of what being a parent is. An understanding that they would not have acquired if they were merely watching their parents be parents. It is funny that the fifth is considered the house of theater, acting, and playing pretend, because research shows that pretending to be something actually gives you more insights into what it means to be that thing than to simply hear about it or read about it. Now, this is very relevant to Mars because, as the planet of analysis, critical thinking, and logic, it wishes to understand how things work. So Mars in the fifth will try its best to actually get its hands dirty. Instead of merely, say, reading about the mechanics of cars, it would want to open up its father's car and interact with the parts personally. Disconnecting this, removing that, memorizing this, etc. Instead of only watching television programs about the dangers of drug use, for example, it would want to, very cautiously, actually try drugs to physically and emotionally study the effects personally. Here, Mars wants to turn study into something real. Hello, 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 Shaq So Wavy. You guys have such interesting names. You guys have such interesting names. I'm so happy that you guys are here. I see 18 concurrent views. That's wonderful. You have Mars in the fifth and you're a huge war gamer. Okay. Well, I'm so happy you managed to catch my live. Yes. You know something, Manifestaholic? I did not add that in this live. I did not add that. Yes, you're absolutely right. Mars does make a gambler in the fifth house. It makes complete and total sense. It makes complete and total sense. Yes, Mars definitely does make a gambler. Thank you for liking my accents. All right, then. Always remember, if you guys have questions, please ask away. But relevant to the stream, of course. Mars here would Mars here could create a lover of toys, but toys as a tool for learning. Mars here would want to buy toys even as an adult, toys that are related to their subject of interest. This way, even if they cannot personally, physically explore their subjects, they can create a simulation. For example, a Mars in the fifth native who wants to understand how the universe works would not be happy merely reading about it, but would buy or even make his own planets in his backyard, create his own stars, or creating his own star map, and carefully draw all the stars in the night sky. He would search the internet to find software that allows him to interact with the universe in a simulation. Such a Mars, even as an adult, could buy Legos, for example, as a means of helping him practically understand space, dimension, and architecture. At this point, I am repeating myself. In this house, we arrive at a true understanding without illusion because we are either actually interacting with the subject matter or we are simulating an interaction with it. All right, then. So let me go more into detail about this. All right, Mars in the fifth, right? There in astrology there are houses that are related to knowledge, there are houses that are related to analysis and understanding, things like that. But it is said that none of those houses come close to the fifth. Do you want to know why? Here's the thing. When you live a life of only reading, only listening, and only thinking in your mind, you want to know what happens? Your ideas become susceptible you become susceptible to being deceived. There's no way of knowing for sure that the ideas that you have and the knowledge you have, you truly understand it. You know what I mean? Take, for example, being in class. Take, for example, being in math class. If you have the attitude of being in math class, of only watching your teacher perform the math exercises in the board, and you never actually practice them on your own, you may think you're smart enough to never having to practice, but actually you end up failing in the tests. You know what I mean? Because only you can gain that understanding through actually experimenting, through actually playing, through actually practicing. You know what I mean? And so the fifth house relates to all those things. It relates to actually playing and actually experimenting with a subject matter. Because when you do that, you really come to your own true understanding of that subject. You know what I mean? Let me see if I can find a space simulator online. Or maybe you guys have some idea of where I could find something like this. Oh, I have to download it. Oh, I don't want to have to download anything. Anyway, let me give you another example. Somebody who is very second house based, if they wanted to understand the universe, they would probably read about it. They would probably watch a YouTube video. Somebody who's very third house based, yeah, they would probably analyze. Yes, they would engage in a lot of analytical thinking regarding these subjects as well. But a fifth house based person would want to, as best as they can, personally interact with that subject matter, physically, emotionally interact with that subject matter. Since most of us cannot just jump on a rocket ship and go to space, the closest thing to do that is to play a game or to enter into a simulation. A simulation that is as accurate as possible as to how the universe actually works. Because when you're interacting in that space, you really come to a much better understanding of how the universe works as opposed to just reading about it or just thinking about it. You know what I mean? The fifth house relates to true understanding and true knowledge for this reason. In academic research, and actually in the age of AI, this is something that we're going to be seeing a lot. If you're not actually making a practice of your subject matter, if you're only reading about it or, yes, only thinking about it in your head, you're not actually understanding it as well as you think you are. When we're at school, I like to use school as an example. You might think that you understand the books that you're reading just by reading them, but you really test out your understanding and you discover your understanding and you develop more understanding when you write essays about it or when you write book reports about it. So the actual learning is not the watching your teacher perform the math exercises. The actual learning is you doing the actual math exercises yourself. The actual learning is not in reading the fiction book. The actual learning is in writing the essay or writing the book report, etc., etc. You have to actually engage and experiment and play with that subject in order to really arrive at an understanding of it. So there's that. It does also apply from the moon chart, yes. Many astrologers consider the moon chart to be just as strong as the ascendant chart. Aggressive violence towards kids depends if it's very badly placed. As opposed to Saturn-related experimentation, that's a good question. What is the difference between the experimentation of Mars in the fifth house versus Saturn's general experimentation? Okay. Let me try to think about this. Let me try to think. I'll try to think about this and I'll get back to you. What would be a good gift for Mars in Cancer in the fifth? If you have Mars in Cancer, what is your ascendant? Your ascendant is Pisces. Pisces ascendant. Oh man, lots of things could be a good gift. But you probably would want to get something that they can play with. Super planet crash, okay. Okay. Yes, if you have a conjunct Saturn, it would definitely restrict its actions. But at the same time, it would force you to become even more practical on regarding those matters. No, if you have Mars conjunct K2 in the fifth house, it would probably suggest that you're not very much interested in engaging in romantic activity. Although with K2 in the fifth house, it could suggest that you're naturally very seductive, naturally very charming, and you naturally can attract people very, very, very easily towards you. Yes, if you also have Swazi placements, then creating simulations would also be great for you. Yes. Going back to this question over here, somebody asks, what are the differences in the experimentation process mentioned in the fifth house compared to Saturn-related experimentation? So see, Saturn on its own is not very intellectual. Saturn on its own is not a very intellectual, it's the least intellectual planet. You know what I mean? And so when somebody has Saturn very strong without anything else going around it, it's not very interested in taking random ideas and experimenting with them. You know what I mean? And so the fifth house is truly the house of experimentation because it's like you're a curious kid. You're like, oh, that's a really fantastic, really interesting thing. Oh, let me try it out in my real life. You're a kid. There used to be this channel, I don't even know if it still exists, called Extreme Sports, right? Where kids would go skateboarding in like the craziest places. There would be a lot of what is it called? What is that thing called? Parkour, right? And so if you're a person who's very fifth house based, you're a child, you're very fifth house based, you see kids skateboarding on TV, parkouring on TV, doing these extreme stunts. You want to know what you're going to do? You're going to go like, hey, that's very interesting. I want to try that myself. and I want to experiment with that myself, and I want to do that with myself. You know what I mean? So fifth house is very intellectually curious, and so it does a lot more experimentation, and it does a lot more variety in experimentation, and does a lot more play in experimentation. Saturn does not engage in experimentation on the basis of intellectual curiosity and things like that. You know what I mean? With Saturn, you're forced to go through certain experiences. You're forced to go through those experiences. It's not even necessarily because you enjoy them or you want to play with those things. You know what I mean? But again, you have to look at the whole chart. You have to look at the chart as a whole. If somebody has Saturn in first and then they have a whole bunch of things going on in the fifth house, that's also quite different. All right, let's go back. Where are we now? So, one of the limitations of the other houses of knowledge is that because they are less interested in physically and emotionally interacting with their subject matter, their knowledge is either incomplete or even erroneous because the intellect on its own can deceive itself. That's the other thing about the fifth house. Whereas the other houses are susceptible to intellectual self deception, the fifth house does not suffer from intellectual self deception because science is a remedy to the intellect. Science humbles the intellect. Your mind on its own comes up with various models of reality. When you think by yourself without actually experimenting, you're convinced of your own ideas. You're convinced of how reality works. How you actually test out your ideas, when you actually test out your ideas, you realize how limited they are. You realize there are limitations. And so experimentation is healing to the intellect. Experimentation corrects the intellect, Going back to that guy that was talking about Saturn, that's also something else that Saturn does. Since Saturn is the least intellectual planet, Saturn also can be very healing to intellectual people because since sometimes very intellectual people get too in their heads, Saturn has a habit of cementing things in the real world. So yeah, it just so happens that Saturn is not as intellectually playful as Mercury or the fifth house. By the way, you want to know something that is very healing for the fifth house? Mercury. Because even the deities that are related to Mercury are very healing to the fifth house, like Matangi, for example. Where were we now? Okay, to truly learn anything, you cannot passively receive information or only interact with it mentally. You have to either A, be in the field to actually try out the knowledge to understand it firsthand, or B, create a simulation of reality in order to understand it firsthand. The fifth is about how simulation, imitation, and play, because to play is to simulate, to play is to imitate, can lead to a deep and personal understanding of any and all disciplines because you yourself are interacting with the discipline in a very tangible and personal way. Again, either directly or through a simulation, imitation of sorts. One of the names of the fifth house is Vidyasthana, the house of understanding. In fact, it can even be called the house of science. The reason the fifth house is lauded as the ultimate house of true understanding is because it actually tests out and lives out the teachings given to it through imitation or simulation or play and arrives at the truth that way. And it can also be called the house of science because knowledge here is no longer merely abstract or merely intellectual. It is instead real, tangible, something you have actually lived through or at least play acted through. It is the house of science because through constant play, simulation, imitation, and experimentation, you literally arrive at a place where you objectively understand a discipline well enough that you have mapped it into a reliable and predictable system, a system based on facts and evidence, not just vain hypothesizing and theorizing. Mars is the primary planet of figuring out how things work in order to make good use of them, is one of the planets that brings out a scientific bent to the fifth house. So, Mars in the fifth can create a scientist. It can create someone who comes up with very reliable theory, formula, technique, method, systems, processes, models, patterns, and recipes because they have not merely read or listened or thought, but have instead tested, experimented, and actively played with the idea in reality or again, or a simulation. What's shadow play? Did I say shadow play? If I did, I made a mistake. If I made the use of shadow play, that's a mistake. You have 3D printers at home. I wish I had a 3D printer. Okay, so you have multiple fifth house placements: Graham Turner 2640, 2640, or however it is that you prefer to say it. You have K2 in the fifth, you have Venus in the fifth, and you also have Mars in the fifth. Okay. And so would you say that you have a 3D printer at home? Would you say that you're a person with many toys? Would you say you're a person with many toys, a person with many hobbies, things like that? No, it's not the same thing as having Mars in the third because Mars in the third is less engaged in play. Mars in the third is less engaged in actual experimentation. Mars in the third is more in their head. It is more in their head. That's the thing. It is more in their head. It's more interested in coming up with its own theories in the head, ideas in the head, and arguing with other people. That's something else. That's something else that it does. Yeah. So it's quite different. It's quite a different energy. When you're a person who, see, one of the differences between being somebody who actually experiments versus somebody who merely theorizes is that people who live their lives theorizing tend to be very argumentative. You want to know why? Their only way of spreading their ideas is by dominating other people intellectually. But when you're somebody who has tested and tested and tested and tested their ideas, guess what? Um, the things that you create on the basis of your testing, your actual testing is in and of itself an argument. What example can I use? What example can I use? You want to know something? Let us use a very basic example. Since we're in the astrology field, consider Claire Nocti, for example. See, here's one difference between Claire Nocti and some other astrologers. A lot of astrologers online are very argumentative. I don't want to name names because I don't want to and also I respect a lot of these other astrologers, but a lot of astrologers are very argumentative because they feel as though the only way they can really prove their ideas to other people is by challenging other people's ideas and dominating them. But you'll find something about Claire Nocti in her work. She doesn't argue with anybody. You want to know why? She does so much research. She does so much experimentation and then she posts them online and it's very difficult to argue with her facts. Even if you disagree with the way that she goes about explaining her stuff, how can you ever disagree with the information that she's giving you? I mean, if she studies the charts of 2,000 artists and she gives you a statistical analysis, who can come up with an argument against that? So the thing about actual experimentation and actual something that you've actually tested and actually proven is that it destroys argumentation. Like you can no longer argue against this person. But when you haven't proven your thing, when you haven't proven your ideas, when you haven't experimented with your ideas, and it's purely mental and purely intellectual, the only tool in your disposal for you to quote unquote make yourself seem right is literally just to argue with other people. Are you understanding what I'm saying? I hope I'm doing a good job of articulating myself. I feel like I'm not exactly, which is why I like to write things down. But in any case, so that is one of the fundamental differences between Mars in the third and Mars in the fifth. Mars in the third creates an extremely argumentative person, and it creates a person who's very mental and very intellectual. Mars in the fifth, because it's a lot of experimentation and a lot of actually proving their ideas to themselves and then presenting them to other people, there's no argumentation there. Mars in the fifth, if the Mars in the fifth person argues, it's purely for fun. They're arguing for fun, but not because they feel like they have to. You know what I mean? So yeah. Okay, interesting. Oh, okay. So would you also say burned lower 8179? That you're also a very hobby oriented person? It is not the same as Mars and Leo, no. You want me to share my placements? All right, I will. I will do you one better. Let me open up Jagannatha Hora so you guys can see my placements right here. These are my placements. These are my placements. There you have it. I'm a Shatabisha ascendant, I'm a Pusha sun, and I'm a Vishaka moon. The eighth house carries many significations, but let's talk about one signification of the eighth house: control, control and domination. And so, if you have the eighth lord and the fifth, you probably like to play a lot of games that have to do with learning how to control other people, learning how to maneuver other people, learning how to manipulate other people, learning how to persuade other people, just things like that. These are the favorite kind of games that you play. And because you're constantly playing those sort of games, you arrive at a special understanding at how to manipulate other people, and then you become like very talented at it. Mercury is more specifically about learning, and Jupiter is more specifically about giving knowledge. Yes. The two teacher planets are Venus and Jupiter. Since we're talking about intellects, what's the difference between Mercury and Jupiter intellects? All right, the differences. Let's try to think about this really quickly. Well, here's one very important difference between Mercury and Jupiter. Everything that we're discussing right now about experiment. See, here's the thing. Having fifth house placements is almost like having a very strong and very prominent Mercury. One of the differences between Mercury and Jupiter is that Mercury is the experimenting planet. Mercury is the practice planet. Mercury is the simulation planet, the imitation planet, the play planet. And so Mercury is a planet that arrives at a personal understanding about a subject through actually playing with it aggressively or all the time. You know, Mercury plays and plays and plays and plays to the point where it arrives at a unique level of skill. Jyeshta also has a lot of this. Jyeshtas love to play. It's the reason why Jyeshtas arrive at a place of such mastery, because they're always doing that thing. They're doing that thing 10 times a day, 100 times a day, 1,000 times a day, because they love doing that thing so much that they end up being the best. Do you want to be the best at your thing? You want to know the easiest way to be the best at your thing? It's the cliche. It's the cliche that all these successful people are always saying all the time. You literally have to have fun doing your thing, because if you're having fun doing the thing, you're going to be doing it so much that you're, of course, going to be extremely good at it. So that's the difference between Mercury and Jupiter. Jupiter can be too abstract. The problem with Jupiter is that Jupiter can be too abstract, and Jupiter can suffer from some of the perversions of the intellect, a little bit. It can suffer from some of the perversions of the intellect, of believing that it understands things that it doesn't actually understand, simply because it has thought deeply about that thing, but has never actually tested it out or experimented with it. You know? So there is that. There is that. But let me think of a few other things really quickly if I can. See, here's the thing. Not everything can be experimented with. Not everything can be played with externally. Some things you can only truly understand them in the realm of the mind and in the realm of the spirits. So certain things, you will never truly test them out in the physical world. You can only know them internally. You know what I mean? And so, yes, it's very much like the difference. Exploring the differences between Mercury and Jupiter is almost like exploring the difference between religion and science. There are many things that you can test out, and testing out things is very, very good and all the rest. But there are certain things that truly, truth be told, you can only really interact with them and understand them internally, spiritually, and mentally. So that's one of the differences between Jupiter and Mercury. When they try to get into each other's fields, they kind of suck. I don't know anything about the Enneagram, so you're very addicted to video games. Okay, I get that. Because you immediately like Vishakas, is that it? Okay, interesting. Thank you for sharing your placements. Yeah. Are you interested in classical piano? Do you do a lot of short songs? Pop music, maybe? But yeah. Hi, Heavenly Sims. I don't consider that a conjunction. For me, conjunctions are 10 degrees. You have not basically missed the live. We're like halfway through. Hi, Ezra. The 12th house with K2 and Saturn. You want to know what Mula Mars could be like? Okay, well, let's try to think about this a little bit. Let me bring out my little notepad so I can write as I think. Because, yeah, I like to write as I think, it helps me. So, what do we know about Mars? Mars is a planet of domination. It seeks to understand how things work. It is a planet of weapons and tools, and it overwhelms those things. Okay, okay, okay. Mula has a lot to do with the unconscious reptilian animal mind or consciousness. Okay, Mars and Mula. Let's quickly say one or two things. If you have Mars in Mula, you're probably somebody who. See, here's the thing about Ketu Nakshatras. Ketu Nakshatras at their worst can be very unconscious. They can be very unconscious of their own behavior. They can act without thinking. You know, there's that aspect of your own personality that you're just not aware of. So if you have Mars and Mula, you're someone who pays a lot of attention to their own self, a lot of attention to their own behavior. You know, whereas other people may lack self-awareness, somebody who has Mars and Mula, they tend to be very aware of themselves, very aware of themselves. And not only are they very aware of themselves, but they also know how to come up with multiple strategies to control or destroy their negative behavior. Listen, many people have a lot of negative unconscious behavior. Maybe you're somebody who is very stubborn and you don't even realize it. Maybe you're somebody who acts from a place of jealousy and you don't even realize it. Maybe you're a person who acts from a place of greed and you don't even realize it. What other unconscious behavior can we think of? Listen, there's a lot of unconscious behavior, but if you have Mars and Mula, you're very good at becoming aware of your unconscious behavior, and you're very good at coming up with multiple strategies to overwhelm and control your unconscious behavior. But in the same way that you can do that, you're also somebody who's very good at paying attention to other people's unconscious behavior patterns. And guess what? Because of that, you're very good at developing strategies to control and manipulate them without them realizing. When you have a behavior pattern that you yourself are not even aware of, guess what? If somebody else is more aware of your unconscious behavior patterns than you are of your own behavior patterns, guess what? They can easily control you. If you're somebody who, for example, you're overly compassionate, you're overly generous, but you don't realize that you are overly compassionate and overly generous, no matter how much your friends try to tell you, listen, Ezra, I'm not saying that this is you, Ezra, but I'm just using you as an example. Your friends and your family are always telling you, Ezra, listen to us. You're not aware of this, but you're too nice. Stop being too nice, Ezra, or else somebody will take advantage of you. But you disagree with them, Ezra. You always say, that's not true. I'm not too nice. Because you're unconscious of that behavior. Guess what, Ezra? If you're overly compassionate and you're not aware of it and you refuse to be aware of it, that becomes an area that somebody else can control you and manipulate you. And so if somebody has Mars and Mula, you are very good at manipulating and controlling people because you're very good at paying attention to the unconscious behavior patterns that those people have. And that's why they're easy to control. All right, there you have it. I need my notepad. Or I need a pen and pencil because that's the way that I think, you know what I mean? So yeah, I've only been playing classical, but I also had to play a lot of contemporary music in a band. Oh, you play in a band? Oh, that's very interesting. My Mars is in Uttarabhadrapada, 5th house. What does that mean? Uttarabhadrapada. Let's think about this for a little bit. What is Uttarabhadrapada? Equals homosexuality, Mars. Oh, so I should keep a poetry book of these notepads. Okay. Oh, so that's not your placement, Ezra. That's somebody else's placement? That's interesting. That's interesting. That's interesting. All right, let's finish our documents. Where are we? All right. Whereas any other house would assume itself learned and knowledgeable, the fifth, and especially Mars in the fifth, would come up with multiple hypotheses about a matter and proceed to experiment and experiment and experiment. There I go again with the same experiment. Interestingly enough, the word Vidya also refers to a mystical name of the letter I, which can otherwise be written as E, or rather, I should say letter E that can otherwise be written as E. The vowel common to Shakti mantras, the mantras of the Mahavidyas, Kreem, Kleem, Shreem, Hreem, Stream, and so on and so forth. The vowel that makes things dance, because this is the vowel that makes things dance. It's the vowel of Shakti. It's the vowel of the feminine aspect of reality that causes change, that causes dynamism, that causes movement in reality. The vowel that is related to manipulating the material world to create or to bring about your own desired events. Okay, so sidebar. The fifth house is actually considered a magical house. right? The fifth house is actually considered a magical house. It's a house that can make things happen in accordance to your own desires as well, you know. So yeah, but that is something that I think we'll explore better in our video of Mercury or even Moon in the fifth house. Yes, 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 yes. Yes, we'll do that. The fourth house is a house of magical power, but the fifth house is also the house of magic words and magic abilities. Yes. All right then. The fifth house being connected to this tells us that true knowledge is proven as the ability to change or manipulate reality. When you have a true understanding of something, you can literally affect change. Mars is also a planet of bending, forging, fashioning, constructing. And so in the fifth house, it suggests that the individual can arrive at a place of such mastery of a particular tool, skill, or weapon that he or she can use that to change situations to his favor and use this tool as a means of control and domination. Yes. The first house is us, but the fifth house is our abilities. Not just any ability, our special abilities. Mars, the problem-solving planet, because it is the planet of survival who has to constantly come up with new solutions to overcome the external world. Of course, sitting in the fifth, it suggests that one is a very talented problem solver, coming up with solutions that are unusual to even everyday problems. The fifth house is also called Mantra Bhava, or the house of the magic word. Because when you arrive at such a unique understanding of a particular subject that no one else has, people marvel at you as though you were something magical. It's like you came up with a trick. But again, this is something that we'll more so talk about with Mercury or Moon in the fifth house. Yes. Or even Rahu, yes. Or even Rahu. But we'll talk about that in those videos. Mars is a planet that is always trying to make itself distinct, always trying to stand out and call attention to itself. Funny enough, one of the names of Mars is Mandaya. Manandaya, which literally means causing pride, as it is the ultimate planet of pride and self-praise. The fifth is the house of celebrity and attention. And so such a one would be a lover of the spotlight and would constantly seek out situations to call attention and admiration to oneself. It can create a celebrity that loves being a celebrity. Since Mars relates so much to one's own critical thinking abilities, one way that Mars would seek distinction and popularity is by showing off its own intelligence. Since Mars is also a planet of masculinity, for men, Mars in the fifth can suggest a lot of pride in one's own masculinity, constantly trying to show off how big and tough and strong one is, and using that as a means of getting attention. Actually, Mars is not a natural masculinity like the sun. Mars is instead the struggle to become masculine, and so it inherently carries some insecurity related to its level of masculinity. Here, Mars may be interested in sports or bodybuilding as a means of displaying itself. All right then. Let us add one more tiny thing. The fifth house is a house of romance, right? But here's the thing. Mars is a malefic. And so it reduces or minimizes the significations of the house or sign or nakshatra. And so Mars in the fifths can make a person less romantic, less charming. It can make a person charming in a different way, but like in the context of romance, right? Less charming, less seductive, and therefore less successful in the areas of romance and attracting the opposite sex. Here's the other thing about Mars in the fifth. We've been talking about play and experimentation and toys, right? Mars can do those things, but Mars does those things for the purpose of understanding, logical thinking, and things like that. But in general, actually, Mars in the fifth reduces the love of fun and play overall. So a Mars in the fifth house person in general is not going to be the type of person that goes out and parties all night. It's not going to be the type of person who, fun for them is not, generally speaking, it's not sporadic, it's not spontaneous, it's not random. They engage in play as a means of better critically thinking and better analyzing. Play for them is a tool for better understanding. Play for them is not this thing of constantly going out, like meeting multiple different types of people. Mars in the fifth does not engage in that kind of behavior, and it actually minimizes that kind of behavior. This is different if you have Mercury or Moon or Venus or Jupiter in the fifth house. Then you're going to be somebody who is very spontaneous. Then you're going to be somebody who loves to go out and do all that crazy stuff. So yeah. Okay. Here we are. What makes the 12th house associated with Saturn in Ketu? Saturn is the Karaka of the 12th house. It is the significator of the 12th house. And Saturn's ultimate expression is liberation. Saturn's ultimate power is to free a person from the control of time. Saturn is a planet of time, but if you submit to Saturn correctly and intelligently, Saturn can literally free you from the influences of time. And karma is bound to time, and so Saturn can also free you from karma. What does Ketu do? Ketu is another planet of liberation. It can also liberate you. Well, Ketu doesn't really liberate you from time. What does Ketu liberate you from specifically? Listen, I'll think about that later. But yes, Ketu is also a liberator, and the 12th house is the house of ultimate liberation. So there you have it. And that is why they're all associated with the 12th house. Is Mars more beneficial for man as in? No, Mars and Venus are just as beneficial for both men and women. What is the best placement for Mars in men? It depends what you want as a man. I've actually never thought about that. Best placement in terms of houses, do you mean? In that case, I would say the third and the sixth, the Karakas of Mars. Because if you have Mars in the third, here's the thing about the third house. It's the house of your siblings, your coworkers, your cousins, your classmates. Mars is a planet that always wants to make itself distinct. And so if you have Mars in the third, it can really separate you from the rest of your classmates. And it can make you really stand out. So yeah. In fact, if you have Mars in the third, and if it's well placed, people are probably very jealous of you, actually. Because you probably you just come across as better than them and superior to them. Let me first answer that Mars and Uttara Bhadrapada in the fifth house question that guy was posing. Okay, so Uttara Bhadrapada is the most hidden, most mysterious, most secluded, and it relates to ultimate and total control of reality, the universe, the world. And so somebody who has Mars in Uttara Bhadrapada, you're probably a very, very, very indirect person. Your means of attack, control, and domination is behind the scenes. You're probably not somebody who likes to openly display their power. You know what I mean? You prefer to find indirect ways of totally controlling a person. In the most negative sense, you could blackmail them. I'm not saying that you would, but that's like an example that I'm giving you. You know what I mean? What else about Mars and Uttarabhadra? Uttarabhadra relates to the expression of Saturn that wishes to escape the control even of time. See, here's the thing about Saturn. Saturn is a planet that oppresses you, but it also is a planet that frees you. Saturn is a planet that relates to all things in this world that control you, but if you're able to overcome those things, you become free of their control. Saturn relates to time because time and karma are the ultimate things that control a person. So yeah, if you have Mars in Uttarabhadra, you don't want to be controlled by anybody. You hate the idea of being controlled by anybody. And so if you have Mars in Uttarabhadra, you're probably somebody who is very, very tough with himself. Very tough with himself. You do not like to submit to your own laziness. You don't like it whenever you're lazy. You do not like the idea of being addicted to anything, or being addicted to drugs, or being addicted even to pornography or things like that. You're probably somebody who you're constantly coming up with strategies to overcome yourself, so that nothing can ever overcome you. You're probably the type of person that you hate coming up with excuses, and you're always coming up with new strategies. And because Mars is in the fifth house, Mars in the fifth house, the fifth house is blessing you with a lot of innovation and a lot of great ideas and a lot of great theories. And you're constantly experimenting new ways to gain control over yourself. And here's the thing, the same way that you come up with new ways of getting control over yourself, you're also coming up with new ways of gaining control also of other people. You're probably also a naturally very controlling person. It's very easy for you to dominate others. You prefer indirect ways of dominating others, but you can also go about it very, very directly. So yeah, there is that. Ooh, sorry, man. So sorry. Right now, my Mars is my not my Mars. My mind is really on Mars, and I to skip over to Saturn right now, can't do it. Yes, but Mars is also related to breaking out of the military as well. A Turkish series called Phi. Oh, Ezra, are you Turkish? Let me see this. A Turkish series called Phi. Purpose of a psychological thriller. Okay. Phi TV series. Phi TV series. Okay, a rating of almost 8. Except I don't speak Turkish. So what do I do? Because I don't speak Turkish. Oh, there are episodes on Daily Motion. Okay, there are English subtitles on Daily Motion. Okay, let me go check on YouTube. Oh no, I can't play a YouTube video or else they'll. Okay, interesting. Stop, YouTube. What are you doing? No, go away. This thing's not going away. Oh, skips. Where the. You're Shadabisha. Okay, cool. Cool, cool. Most of my friends are Aquariuses, Aquarius ascendants, actually. Yeah, the Nishtas and Chitas do engage in this type of behavior. Okay, wow. Very sorry to hear this. One of the things that you can do with Saturn is this. What are the difficult things in your life that you're running away from? That you're running away from doing? Submit to those things and actually do those things. Do you know that you should be waking up earlier, but you're not? Learn to wake up earlier. Because if you don't wake up earlier, you're allowing your laziness to dominate over you. Do you break your own promises, the promises that you make to yourself? Then you're weakening yourself as well. And things of that nature. Moon is natural passivity. Sun is natural. Sometimes I forget that in English this doesn't work just as well. But yes, I suppose you could say Moon is a natural femininity. The Sun, I suppose you could say, is a natural masculinity. Mars is a struggle, oftentimes, to be masculine. But Venus, see, here's the thing. When a man has a strong Venus and a prominent Venus, he becomes in love with his own masculinity. And when a woman has a strong Venus, she becomes in love with her own femininity, because Venus creates a lot of polarity in a person. Venus creates a lot of polarity in a person. That is what Venus does. So, no. Mars and Venus do not both relate to an artificial femininity or masculinity. Mars is what relates to a struggle to be masculine, but the other way doesn't count. Yes, Mars in the third makes a person argumentative. Yes, Mars in the fifth can create a nerd. Oh, you asked the question of Uttarabhadrapada, didn't you burn lower 8179? It was you, wasn't it? All right, okay. We've been here for about an hour. This has been a great stream. Let me just finish reading the chat over here so we can all say good night or good afternoon, because I know it's afternoon where some of you guys are. Very sorry to hear that, Lola. All right, guys. Thank you guys so very, very, very much for participating. I always love it when you guys participate. All right, then. See you guys in the Mars in the 6th video.